Welcome back to our monthly Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. I'm your host, Amy Forsyth, and I'll be here on the first of each month with guests who provide expertise, resources, and peer-to-peer support as part of the American Legion's Be the One initiative to prevent suicide within the veteran community. Learn more at betheone.org, and let's get today's conversation started. Today, our guest is Adam Marr, a U.S. Army veteran who deployed to Iraq in 2010 and flew over 400 combat hours. Today, Adam is Director of Operations for the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, a group of more than 45 organizations that advocates for increased research and safe, affordable access to psychedelic medicine and assisted therapies for veterans and their families. Adam, thank you so much for being on the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast.
Thank you, Amy. It's such a pleasure and joy to be here today with you.
I'm so excited to talk to you because reading your background just sounds like you've really been able to take your career and take your passion for helping veterans really to the next level. But first, I want to go back and tell our audience and talk about your military service. Well, first, where you're from, and then, how you joined the Army and where that took you.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm originally from Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, and I was able to kind of find my way into the Army through an ROTC scholarship at Texas Christian University. So September 11th was my senior year of high school, and it's a formidable time in any young man's life or young woman's life when they're, 18 years old trying to figure it out. And that's when the Twin Towers, fell for me. And so kind of looking back on it now and having a chance, even some 15 years afterwards, to go to the memorials, that day absolutely changed the course and the trajectory of my life and in this country for forever. So commissioned 4 years later and headed to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is now Fort Novosel in Southeast Alabama, and went to flight school there and was fortunate enough to get my first choice, which was the Apache helicopter. The logic there was if I was going to go to combat, I was joining the Army at a nation at war. It was I want to be able to return fire if somebody's shooting at me. But the other mission that really resonated with me, which is funny because of the work that I'm doing now, was the medevac mission. So it was either attack and reconnaissance or go in there and get out, our wounded and protect in that capacity. So anyway, I had 10 years, the ability to be a company commander and do really wonderful things, amass a lot of flight hours, over 1,500 flight hours, become pilot in command, air mission commander. And I generally had a good experience, and I think the greatest thing for me was the ability to be that company commander and leader, to serve a company of 8 Apaches and the pilots and the warrant officers that were responsible for that mission. And I think it was there that I really learned if I could find ways to solve their problems and to be available for them, to have that relationship with them, then I could hear their problems and challenges early on, and I could identify things that I needed to redirect or address so that we could do the mission that was in front of us and be that much more effective. And so for me, the time in the military was really about how can I be the best humble servant leader to serve our nation at war, to do what we've been asked to do and do it the best that we could do it.
Well, you served for about 10 years on active duty, and then your transition. Talk about your transition and how you and your brother also served. So you come from a family of service, and then how you guys really galvanized this movement, and of course co-authoring your book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the plan was just to transition out and go back to school, go back to Texas, get my MBA. And my older brother and younger brother were both in the service at that time. My older brother is a Special Forces Green Beret. In about 2013, when he got back from his last deployment, he started showing the symptoms of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. But we didn't really know that at the time. And so what I saw was somebody who continually watched his deployment videos over and over again while consuming more and more alcohol, while not being able to do the things that he loved to do. So we're talking about elite, special forces performer who could run through walls, learn foreign languages, charismatic, loving person that loved his family, that ultimately is getting lost on the way home from post to his house, forgetting the names of his children, and then going through the military medical system at the time. It's just prescription medication after medication until he woke up on 13 medications one day. And you can see the recipe that happens when you take away someone's purpose and passion and what they thought they were supposed to do in this world, and then you have a brain that's not functioning the way that it's supposed to, and then medication, and telling them with all the experts in the world saying this is how it's going to be for the rest of your life. Then you have a recipe for the suicide epidemic and crisis that we're facing today. We're well aware of the numbers, anywhere from 17 to 44 a day, depending on the sources in the year. But it's absolutely atrocious. And so luckily my brother wasn't one of those statistics, and we were able to seek an alternative therapy outside of the VA, outside of the medical system, through a doctor, Dr. Mark Gordon, Millennium Health Centers in Encino, California. And he is a neuroendocrinologist. And through an objective lab panel on the blood and a detailed patient questionnaire of your medical history, i.e., did you play sports, growing up, and were you prone to a lot of concussions? Were you in the Army? Did you jump out of airplanes? Were you in concussive blast waves? These are the things that affect, the brain. And so what I learned more about the brain than I ever thought I would, that every time one of these things happen, it's cumulative over the course of your life. And every time the brain touches the outside shell of your, thick skull, it classifies as a mild traumatic brain injury. So some of these events where you're not even unconscious is literally making your brain ripple in your skull thousands of times, causing an injury. But what that does is it shears the neurons in the brain, causes swelling and inflammation, and a disruption of the hormones. So this doctor, through a lab panel, is just able to see, okay, well, because of your personalized injuries, here's what you're insufficient or deficient or no longer can produce in the brain. Here's where your hormones are out of balance. So we're going to naturally put them back into balance, and we're going to put you on an anti-inflammatory. And guess what? You started to get better. That was the case for my brother. And, I think in 2014, before he was even out of the military, before I was even out of the military, we were working on Warrior Angels Foundation, because nothing existed like this at this time. What we had to do and go through as a family, it almost took my brother's life. It caused fractures with all my brothers, with our parents, trying to figure out what's happening here. When you're at that point where it looks like you're going to lose somebody and everything's falling apart, like, you just want to trust the authorities. You want to look to the doctors and say, this is sound advice, we're going to follow that. Well, in my brother's case, like, that was killing him. But then we found this other doctor that was able to provide this protocol. So Warrior Angels was all about providing answers, hope, and healing, where there wasn't really a lot in 2014, 2015 on this front. Now, we felt like we were the only ones working on this. Obviously, that's very naive to say that. But, that's where we were at the time as we were coming out of the military. We didn't know where the doctors were. We didn't know where the general and flag officers were. Well, there weren't really many working on this at that time. And so we just said, well, hey, we're problem solvers. We went to combat. We came back. Let's solve this problem. We're going to work ourselves out of a job in 5 years. We're going to have this protocol implemented. And that was how ambitious we were, kind of having this big moonshot. And we fell short of that goal, but I never thought we would be where we're at today. Or I guess maybe I did think we would be here. But I think you have to have those kind of goals in order to land somewhere where people didn't think you could. And along the way, we just got really good at telling our story, because we realized that we needed, strong people like my brother, bearded, tattooed, special forces guy, saying, hey, I'm not okay. This isn't working for me. I need help. It's not working. And then finding something that does work. Well, we need to stand up and tell our story. We need to advocate for this. So we wrote a book called Tales from the Blast Factory. I think it came out around 2017, which just kind of chronicled, my brother's personal story of going through the military medical system and kind of the answers we found. And for this TBI, this protocol works wonderfully. And it's still, even to this day, not widely accepted within the VA or the DoD, but we're working in that way. He also got to tell, we went in and did lots of media. He was on Joe Rogan podcast and ultimately made a documentary called Quiet Explosions, Healing the Brain, which really took the military story and my brother's story and expanded upon it through 10 different individuals. And it was veterans, athletes, and civilians, male and female, to kind of show the comprehensive spectrum of how these injuries affect all of humanity, not just veterans. And so it's done really well to be able to tell that story of how one can heal alternatively for this injury. But along the way, and I'll kind of pause here, for a second, but what we found was there's more injuries than just that needed addressing. But this was our entry point into that.
Well, a fascinating story and tale of the past, that 10-year window. But if you take us back to 2013, when you're really just coming together and realizing, making phone calls, you're doing research, you're trying to find solutions. Talk to us about, can you take us back to that time where maybe people were saying, no, we can't do this, or afraid to kind of go down that hole because for fear of what people would think, or is it illegal, or the VA doesn't approve so we can't do it, or kind of describe how you guys were navigating those challenges.
Yeah, and I'll kind of draw the parallel here to what Warrior Angels focus on, which is the neuro restoration and TBIs, which is not illegal or scheduled substances by any means. But in doing this work, what we saw a lot of folks that came into our kind of ecosystem that needed care. What we were able to do in telling our stories is give people a lot of hope, but we realized the demand was so great, far greater than anything we as a little nonprofit could do. We also had the opportunity ourselves to heal with psychedelic assisted therapies. And so these therapies helped address the psychological aspect or component of the trauma related to our service. And so, when my brother had his experience, he was able to unpack, in 15 or 30 minutes, all of his Afghanistan trauma, just crying and sobbing through it. Now, this is a guy that would say, I loved what I did over there. I thought I was doing the best for my country. I didn't have any quote unquote trauma. But it just kind of highlights that there's things that we're carrying that we don't even realize. And having the opportunity to address these things and confront these things with love and compassion and look at it from a different plane of perspective was absolutely transformative for my brother. It was transformative for me and my own experience with these medicines to be able to address my own trauma and what I went through. And so, but at that time, 2015, 2016, like this is still very taboo. And we're having to go outside of the country into places where this is legal, to get access to this. And
like where did you go? Can you describe what you guys were setting off on a venture outside of the country, and did it worry you, or were you a little nervous?
Yeah, and maybe it's just best to kind of talk about my own experience with this. And so when I was at the height of my own personal trauma, 2018, after losing somebody and then having my younger brother attempt his own suicide and finding his body and being the one to call the ambulance, I was already 3 years out of the military. I was already working on a nonprofit to solve, TBI and this kind of problem. But here I am, a human being and a veteran, confronting my own trauma. And that negative thought pattern and loop was, I was in a state of constant fight or flight, thinking that, every time the phone rings, it's gonna be some tragic call of a loss of life. And so at that point in time, I was able to, just kind of, I guess one of the benefits was having a network at this time where I knew how to reach out for help on these kind of things. And it was, hey, I don't know how to do this anymore. I'm really struggling. And I was able to link up with the nonprofit called The Mission Within with Dr. Martin Polanco. And he has an offering where I had to travel to Mexico for a weekend. And over the course of that weekend, I experienced two medicines called Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT. And those are the two most powerful psychoactive substances that you could do. And the way that this protocol is set up, and the Ibogaine is having significant success helping people to reset their neuro-pathways that are having them be dependent on the things that they're addicted to, such as opioids, such as alcohol, such as negative thoughts that you can't escape from. And so having that almost kind of resets your nervous system. So when you come out of it, you are no longer bound to those thoughts, beliefs, and action that are defining your physical reality. You go through this process of tapping into your subconscious and being able to go through this experience to where those things unbind themselves from you. And when you emerge on the other side, you're able to look at things from a fresh perspective, almost as if somebody hit a reset button. And then we had a day of rest, and then we had 5-MeO-DMT, which is another powerful substance that comes from the Sonoran desert toad. And this one's very fast acting, only lasts about 15 minutes. And for me personally, this is what I attribute to reconnecting me to my Christian faith. It was that powerful and that spiritual of experience where I felt that I was connected to the love of the creator of the universe. And so to have that kind of experience and understanding and come back from it, like I'm not thinking about those negative patterns anymore. I'm thinking about what just happened to me and how do I move forward in life? How do I serve people better to help, one, comprehend what happened and map a course and trajectory for my new life, but also make sure that other people know about this and have the ability to access this. And it just wasn't possible at that time. Like I felt like we had to, a good story is my brother had already had his experience and he wanted to write a chapter about this in our book. And I actually advised him not to, because I didn't think it fit into the story at the time. We were very much about the TBI and those kind of things. And I understand why he wanted to put it in there, but it wasn't the right timing in that. Fast forward to 2021, my brother is testifying and we're helping to support, along with other special forces, veterans, and nonprofits, former Texas Governor Rick Perry, Dr. Lynette Averill of the Baylor College School of Medicine, who's also a part of the coalition and co-founder of A Reason for Hope. And they're helping to pass legislation, the first of its kind in Texas, to study these medicines again, ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin at the Baylor College School of Medicine to address TBI and PTSD for veterans that have suffered that. And so it was absolutely just the amount of time going from, hey, don't put that in the book, to, are we really here in a conservative state helping to pass this legislation? Like, what is happening? And as I try and kind of do the calculus and math, you just have to look at the current state of mental health in this country, specifically as it ties to the care that our veterans are receiving. And what we are currently doing and the current solutions that we have continue to produce the same results. And we continue to have the numbers. And so that's why this work is so important, and excited to kind of talk a little bit about, the coalition and what's come from that, first passing, of the legislation. But it was pretty wild to see how much this has changed in just a short amount of time.
It really is. We're talking with Adam Marr. You've written a book, and then the book went on, I'm reading in the notes, book went on to become, a documentary. Do you think how that's expanded the reach for letting people know about what you guys are experimenting, what you're trying to do? And people must be calling you out of the woodwork, trying to get help themselves or find help for a veteran and find help any way they can for a loved one or the veteran themselves?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that was something that we saw, when we did a lot of media in 2016, and then the movies come out. And look, anytime we did any media or storytelling, the premise was kind of this: let's put out something that's of value that helps people. If it can be evergreen in nature, great. Let's illuminate information that we found and that's been beneficial to us in our own healing journey, and let's find a way to help people to understand and make it more accessible. Because I have to tell you, Amy, like, one of the worst experiences of my life, other than what I've already highlighted for you, is knowing that these things can work and going out and trying to tell people about it and generating the interest and demand, where for the last 8 years, with pretty regularity, I've had to receive, notes from veterans and people that lay out their absolute worst trauma that they've ever experienced in their life and how they're struggling at the point of no return. And I'll tell you that, after seeing that month after month, year after year, how could I, as somebody that raised my right hand to say that I'm going to protect and defend the Constitution in this country at all costs, and knowing that all those people went and did that with me, and that this is what I'm hearing on the other side of this, that I'm going to put every single thing I have and I've been given by the grace of God in this life to serve and help provide solutions to this problem. And you know what? My brother and I, like I said, it felt like we were the only ones, kind of working on this. In 2015, that wasn't the case. But you know what? We just kept doing. And we didn't raise enough money, but the money that we raised, we made it go to and get it to the people that, that we could help. And then by telling our story and writing books and going on podcasts and making a movie, other people saw what we were doing. And they said, you know what? I want to be a part of that. I want to help solve it in my own way. So I'm going to start a nonprofit. So one of our coalition members, Jesse Gould, former Army Ranger, was able to go down to Peru and get ayahuasca support from some of the indigenous folks down there. And it was absolutely transformative for him because he was really struggling. And he went back to kind of the real notable organization, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Sciences. And he said, hey, I want to help create a veteran program. And, they didn't hear back from him, at the time. They do have a veteran program now, and they're very active in this space. But in 2017, Jesse was just like, okay, cool. I'm going to start my own nonprofit and do it. And he was the first veteran nonprofit to help raise funds to get veterans out of country and access to this. So it was just saying, like, there's a problem. I have a solution. It's not currently accepted or available. Well, guess what? We're going to use all the skills and traits that we were trained on to go to combat on, but now we're going to apply them for good. We're going to apply them for humanitarian mission, right? And so what we're seeing is that once the veteran community, albeit, yes, those horrible emails of trauma and distress, but once we can get them the right personalized access to these, because these psychedelic medicines are not for everybody, and not everybody has a TBI. But what we're learning is that we need an individualized protocol of medicine to be able to address each person based off their individual needs and injuries and history. And when we're able to do that and put these things together, well, we realize that what we are really marching towards is a whole new system of well care instead of a healthcare predicated on sickness. And the veterans, when healing themselves, are the ones that are stepping up and using all their operational and strategic expertise and calling on the veteran network to solve this problem. And so that's really how the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition came about, which I'm the director of operations, because of what happened in Texas. And then also we had similar legislation being passed by our state policy director, Jesse McLaughlin, through his own personal psilocybin experience and his own network. He was a Republican state congressman in the Connecticut legislature and was able to get similar legislation to what passed in Texas in 2021. So these happened independent of each other, right? Just like it was time. And Brett Waters, a former antitrust attorney who had lost his mother and grandmother to suicide, started Reason for Hope with former three-star Marine Lieutenant General Marty Steele, who, when he got out in 1999, was the second highest commanding officer in the Marine Corps. And they co-founded Reason for Hope, was just saying, hey, let's look at these psychedelic assisted therapies, and let's figure out ways to get the policy and advocacy behind it so that we can open up programs, kind of looking at Texas and Connecticut as the model. And they also brought in Dr. Lynette Averill, who testified as an expert witness in Texas House Bill 1802. So Brett reached out to us and said, hey, Adam and Andrew of Warrior Angels, would you support, kind of a coalition that I'm thinking about getting started? And I basically said, Brett, not only will we support it, but I would actually like to dedicate my time to helping you get it off the ground. Because in this time period of getting out and doing this nonprofit, I also spent 5 years as a management consultant at Accenture working on organizational transformation. And so I had left that work in 2021 to go back to the nonprofit world, and was really just looking for ways to do this purpose-driven work for the community, having this new skill set, right? So everything that we've kind of already talked about, an understanding of the landscape, plus these organizational skill sets in the consulting space, to say, hey, I think we have something here. And I think if we build it the right way, look into General Steel as that humble servant leader, the most credible service record that you're going to find. And if we can build this where all voices are equal, like a true kind of Knights of the Round Table, because there's a lot of people who are working and solving this problem in their own right. But what if we could come together and be stronger together? What if we could define a state, policy and strategy? What if we could look at the federal regulations and see, what work we could be done there? What if we could create this decentralized network and have consistent communication flow and build community around this thing? And so today, 1 year later, the coalition is over 45 organizations. I think we have, approaching 100 members. And these are veteran support organizations, CEOs, executive directors. They're people that are working from within the VA, not as VA advocates or components, but just because they believe in this. And so they've decided to join and help shape and influence. So they're the facilitators, they're the therapists, they're the doctors, right? That's kind of one expert area of the coalition. Another expert area is the lawyers, the regulators, the people that understand how the law works at the state and the federal level. So we need those folks. And then the other important pool is the veterans that have been leading on these front lines, the veterans that have healed with these medicines, that have these personal stories of overcoming their TBI and their PTSD. And then the ones that have started creating the organizations and building bridges to a better tomorrow. And so the coalition is just a group of all these organizations and leaders that have been working in the space. And then what we do is we said, let's look at what worked in Texas. Let's look at what worked in Connecticut, and let's go and test some things, right? Let's look at what can be done, because this is uncharted water and territory that we're going into. And so a year later, we helped pass and open up $12 million in funding across 4 states, $1 million in Michigan, $1 million in Connecticut, $5 million in Illinois, and $5 million in Arizona. And then we also concurrently have been working with the state of Kentucky with the Kentucky Opioid and Abatement Advisory Commission to look at Ibogaine, which is one of the things that I told you that I had experience with to be able to combat the opioid epidemic. And so we've had 5 trips up there. There's actually a public hearing today with the commission that's actually hearing from expert witnesses from the FDA, lawyers that understand and have sued the DEA. And what they're looking at is the processes and steps that something that's a Schedule I substance like Ibogaine would have to go through to be able to make these pilot programs available, because it's really expensive to put it through this process. And the crazy thing is, when people get access to these medicines, what we're finding is, they're not having to have significant reoccurring doses. We have examples for instance, of one individual that came in and testified and shared his personal testimony last month of never trying any psychoactive substance before, being an opioid addict that turned into a heroin addict, that had one treatment with Ibogaine and has been sober and off heroin for 10 years. And it's absolutely remarkable when you look at the current state of, the opioid epidemic as you go from state to state, or when you look at TBI and PTSD as you go across this country, and then you look at how these things are helping to save lives, reconnect people to their, spirituality, setting them on a path of having peace and purpose within, and oftentimes reigniting that path of service. But we have regulatory hurdles that put these things in a controlled substance that allow them to be so prohibitive that we can't even amass the amount of data that we need to quantify what we experientially already know is happening, because we're in a crisis and we're having to do something. So it's this really weird time of having to do these things that are illegal outside of the country, and how do we save lives right now? But it's absolutely a crisis. It's absolutely an urgent matter. And it has to be done in concert with the state and the federal, looking at the Controlled Substances Act. And we're talking about medicines that get people better so they don't become dependent on it for the rest of their life. So it doesn't make that much sense from a business model standpoint. So we need the best and the brightest and the smartest people in the world working on this. And that's what we currently have. But it's also really exciting because the American Legion has now stepped up to be on the forefront of this movement.
Well, it's quite a journey you've been on. Let me take you back 15 years or so, where you're going deploying, as an Apache helicopter pilot. You could have never imagined in a million years you'd now find yourself here learning about the laws and about the regulatory prohibitive actions against all this. And so can you talk to people who know nothing about this, about how they might get involved, and then the connection to the American Legion, which has their posts spread across the country, and really the value of having those posts that really makes the difference for you and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Amy. It is a far cry from, I just thought I was going to get out and go to business school. I was going to go into the oil and gas industry because I don't know, it seemed like the place to go to, and I could not have imagined the trajectory and the course that I would have been on these last 7 years. And I've reflected back. I've been doing a lot of reflection, here lately, and at first it was just what we were thrust into. And so it was what our family had to confront. And so once you confront that and you make it through the other side, in the military, we turn around and we check on our buddies. Where's our buddy at? Oh, he fell down. Well, we better turn around and make sure that he's able to stand up and he can go. So we're not, leaving anybody behind. And the other thing, and I kind of alluded to this, but, we just moved back to small town, rural Alabama, to be closer to my wife's family. It was as close to the first post I was ever at. And, I recently reaccepted, Jesus Christ, and got baptized at my small church. And I attribute this pain and trauma that I went on, but also these medicines to reconnect me to my spiritual faith. And then as I look back, I say, there were some divine things happening, to me, where I just answered the call from God, right? And I think everybody can probably relate to that in some way, especially when they look back and they say, hey, there's something greater than myself that was there to kind of help me make this step through. So when I boil that down to a practical sense, right, just like a church is where you can go and have community in that regard, from the veterans, like one of the biggest things that's lacking is a place of community where we can come together, where we can check on each other, where we can do things that are of meaning and value, for the community. And so I've been so focused on this, grand picture of helping to contribute to solving this problem on a massive scale that I've lost touch with, the community in which I live. And not only that, like didn't show up for it. So when we moved back to Fort Rucker, Alabama, I wanted to change that. And I have to kind of attribute Dr. Sue Sicily for her work that she's been doing as a part of the coalition, because she had the foresight to get a resolution passed to support these medicines and therapies at her American Legion post, where Kendrick Spiegel is the post commander of 426. So they passed a resolution. I want to say it was like December of just this last year. Well, that led to her linking up with the counterpart, a former Marine lieutenant colonel, who was a part of a post in Phoenix, Arizona. And then Jarvis Reddick, a post 65, passed that same resolution. So having that happen and them showing up on our coalition calls where we're talking, we're sharing what's happening as we're trying to solve this problem, I just thought, you know what, I should go and join my local American Legion. I should look at showing up for my community and not just being so in the clouds that I can't keep my feet on the ground in the community in which I live. So I joined Post 12 out of Dothan, Alabama, just this past summer. And that's Lehman Irby is our post commander. And we got a great relationship that's, just kind of getting started, but he's a Black Hawk crew chief and I'm an Apache pilot. So we already kind of, found that symbiotic, relationship. And that was the beautiful part about coming back. Now I get to plug in with all these, older Vietnam era helicopter pilots that are here in my local post and finding out ways to share kind of the things that I've been working on and what we're on the precipice of, but also getting them excited about something really big that they can be a part of. And I was surprised to find, because, I'd been working on this, I wasn't really looking at, the Legion or other, VSOs at kind of what they were doing. Once I started learning about the history of the Legion, like I was absolutely, floored. One of the only VSO to be stood up by Congress, over 100 years old, helped pass the GI Bill. And then really learning about the grassroots movements and the structure of the Legion that allows people to have ideas to make the community and the country better, and for the post to be able to vote on that right there. And so seeing how these ideas can come from the people and come forth and emerge, I think is really exciting. And then I also had the chance to connect with Waco Hoover, who's working on the Be the One campaign. And as he started talking to me about, this campaign and what it means, for the Legion, I said, man, that's absolutely remarkable. And that's something that I want to support and be a part of and help advocate for, because I think that as I look at the Legion in these decentralized posts all across the country, that there's already beautiful infrastructure in place. And if more people like me that cared about these problems would just take the time to look at how they can be involved at the local level, well, I think we would solve a lot of these problems as well. And I think what's really exciting is, to also see how we can take these things together and pass things to be able to drive change at the congressional level, which, oh, by the way, is something that the Legion has been doing for 100 years. So it's kind of quite remarkable. And then, and so that's how the Legion ties into some of the things that we've been working on. But I think the other thing that's really exciting to me is like just getting involved in the cool things that are happening like here at my post 12. So like, for example, we just had our meeting our monthly meeting last week, and the county commissioner came, and we also had one of the division commanders for the state of Alabama to come. And a couple of months ago, like that just would have been unheard of for our posts. And so to see the excitement of those people coming and attending, and why were they coming? Well, because the county wants to give us 5 acres of like uncleared land in the city that they had, and they have to use it. And they thought, what if we give that to the Legion? Well, there's some regulatory hurdles that we have to go through. But now the Post is thinking about, well, if we get that land, one, we have to go through the steps to do that, but then we could put a building on there, and then we can have our headquarters. But then I come in and I say, hey, we could do that, but what if we leave a lot of the foliage and trees, and we make like walking trails and paths, and we make it kind of like a therapeutic retreat? And what if we just kind of dream and set the vision a little bit more boldly to say, why don't we just try and make it a jewel of the South? Something that the rest of the Legion can look to and say, oh, I didn't know our posts, could look like that, and we could do those type of things. I don't know where it's going to land, but it has to start with like the art of the possible and where you want to get to and go. And I think that there's a lot of people that want to show up, that want to help, that want that community, and they just need a little spark. And so, I think that if I'm talking to somebody who's more like me, I would challenge them, go get involved in your local Legion. Like, show up for them, bring your skills, your capabilities, the things that you're good at, and see how you can be of service and see what you can provide. And I bet you they're willing to help you on the things that you want to see come into fruition as well, because it's not, it can only be what we want. No, it's a collaborative, teamwork and effort. And so I think that's really exciting. And so I've just been so very pleasantly surprised with my local Legion, the grassroots, the things that we're working on, but how it's having an impact, even at the national level.
And you mentioned that you were at the convention in Charlotte, North Carolina in August. Can you describe what you were, the feedback and what you were doing there?
Yeah, and so we had the awesome opportunity to go and present. Dr. Averill presented breakthrough therapies at the national convention in Charlotte this year, and I think it was really cool to see like just all the marketing kind of material as you get into Charlotte in the town, and you see all like the banners like throughout, and people kind of showing up, and you're like, oh man, this is something to be seen. Like, you need to experience this. And I know the one next year is going to be in New Orleans, so I think we're going to have to get another contingent, and go down, because who wants to miss New Orleans? But yeah, so we had the opportunity to present, and it was to the TBI and Suicide Prevention Subcommittee of VA&R. And it was pretty well attended. And I had heard Dr. Averill give the presentation before. She had given it in Congress to the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, and it's just absolutely incredible to hear her go through just the research and the data and the evidence that supports this. What I'm really good at is talking about, my experience. What she's really good at is showing the data and the science behind it. So I'm kind of looking out, in the room, and it's hard to tell how people are receiving this, because we're like, are we really at the Legion, talking about this at nationals? And some of the questions that came up were some of the most intelligent and thoughtful questions. And I think just wanting to know more. But the big thing was also, like, I have my son and he's experiencing this. Where can he go and get help? So again, it quickly turns into, we know people that are hurting now. What can we do right now? And unfortunately, there's so little that can be done right now. And so that's why we want to continue to say, it's important to put the pressure on. It's important to put the pressure on the VA. It's important to put the pressure on your state legislator. It's important to put the pressure on Congress in the Senate to make this change. And I think that's what we realize is there, again, that it was well received, and that there's a need for this, and that, we have a clear pathway. And just recently, out of the National Executive Committee meeting in Indianapolis, we had a pretty remarkable resolution that was kind of coming from the work from, Kendrick Spiegel and Jarvis Reddick and Lehman Irby and Sue Sisley, and being able to go and share this, at nationals, to show them like who's standing behind this and what's behind it. And so it's an exciting time for the coalition. It's an exciting time for the Legion as well.
Indeed, that was it was my first time going to a national convention for American Legion. It was just such a tremendous showing of support, such a powerful organization. And that's why we're here at the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. We really appreciate you joining us today. And I think you wanted to read the resolution that you're referencing. Can you read it for us?
Yeah, thank you for that, Amy. It would be my honor to read this and share this with all the listeners. So the National Executive Committee of the American Legion, October 11th, 12th, 2023, out of Indianapolis, Indiana, resolution number 5, emerging therapies to address veteran suicide. And this originated out of the Veteran Affairs and Rehabilitation Commission, submitted by the Veteran Affairs and Rehabilitation Commission. Whereas known and recorded symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can include a wide range of negative effect on veteran physical and mental health. And whereas nearly 1 of our 4 service women experienced military sexual trauma during their time in service. And whereas the Department of Veteran Affairs research has proven MST is commonly associated with PTSD. And whereas the VA has reported that around 23% of veterans using VA care have or will experience PTSD in their lifetime. Excuse me. Whereas PTSD is a leading cause of veteran suicide, with PTSD affected veterans 3 times more likely to report hopelessness and suicidal ideation than those without PTSD, an average of 16 to 17 veterans taking their lives each day. And whereas VA trials of MDMA-assisted therapy have found that the majority of participants experience significant reduction in PTSD symptoms. And whereas there are currently multiple successful privately funded VA-led studies regarding the treatment of veterans with PTSD utilizing MDMA-assisted therapies. And whereas MDMA and psilocybin were recently granted breakthrough therapy designation for the treatment of PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, and major depressive disorder due to the significant improvement shown over currently available interventions. And whereas the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition has testified before Congress on the importance of the right to try, other successful trials conducted outside of the United States using ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT, which have shown significant reductions in suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Resolved by the National Executive Committee to the American Legion in regular meetings assembled in Indianapolis, Indiana on October 11th and 12th, 2023, that the American Legion urges Congress to pass legislation funding continued research of emerging therapies for veteran health, including but not limited to MDMA, psilocybin, combination therapy of ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, and ketamine, and be it finally resolved that the American Legion calls on the Department of Veteran Affairs to conduct research on these emerging therapies and expedite funding. It's incredibly emotional for me to read this, to see the work that's being done. I just couldn't be more grateful. Thank you, Amy.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to hear directly from you and the amazing work that you're doing. And we are so proud of all that you're doing. Thank you so much for being a guest and sharing this information with our listeners. And we're going to put all the links to, your sites and how people can learn more. I know there's going to be people who are really going to be interested and support you in any way they can. So appreciate it. Adam Marr, Director of Operations for the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition. Such great work. Thank you so much. And thank you, Alphas, for tuning into the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. Remember, you can be the one to save one veteran. Find resources and more information at betheone.org and connect with the American Legion on social media to keep the conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And please share this with others. And we'll see you on the 1st of next month. Thank you again, Adam. Have a great day.
Thank you.
On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. If you're a veteran in crisis or concerned about one, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. You're not alone. The Veterans Crisis Line is here for you, and you don't have to be enrolled in the VA. Help is available, and speak with someone today.